Imagine spending years trying to survive in a world where the dead are everywhere. Now imagine finally finding a place that feels safe, a place with food, a place with people, a place you can actually call home. And then, in a single moment, the ground itself turns against you. That is where we are heading in The Walking Dead: Dead City Season 3, Episode 5, Imperialis. But this time, the biggest threat may not be the walkers. It may not even be Negan, because Maggie and Negan have reached a point neither of them ever expected. They are no longer simply enemies. They are becoming something much more dangerous. They are becoming partners. And when two people with this much history start working together, there is always a price to pay. Season 3 has been building towards something very different from the original Dead City story. Instead of simply sending Maggie and Negan into Manhattan to survive, the season has been exploring what happens when survivors stop running and actually try to build something. Their Manhattan community represents something rare in this world: hope. But hope is fragile, and Episode 4, Found Lost, leaves that hope badly damaged. Maggie and Louise have been searching for valuable resources while Negan and Renata work to protect the settlement. At the same time, Manhattan itself is becoming increasingly unstable. The city has already suffered enormous destruction, and the earthquake changes the equation completely. Buildings are damaged. Routes that once seemed safe are no longer reliable. Walkers can reach places they couldn't reach before, and most importantly, the community is running dangerously low on food. That detail may sound simple, but in the Walking Dead universe, food is never just food. Food is power. Food determines who gets protected, food determines who gets sacrificed, and food determines who controls the future. That is why the situation facing Maggie and Negan is much bigger than simply finding another supply run. They have built a community. Now they have to prove they can keep it alive. And that is where the title of Episode 5 becomes interesting: Imperialis. The title immediately sounds bigger than a simple survival story. It suggests power, control, empire, and that is exactly what Dead City has been quietly building toward. Because every surviving community eventually faces the same question: do we survive together, or does someone have to rule? Maggie has spent years fighting to protect the people she loves. Negan has spent years learning that fear can be one of the fastest ways to control people. Those two philosophies could not be more different. Maggie believes people have to trust each other. Negan believes people sometimes need to be afraid of what happens if they don't cooperate. And now, they are trying to build the same future. That is the contradiction at the heart of Season 3. Maggie and Negan may finally be working together, but their past has not disappeared. Glenn is still there. Every time Maggie looks at Negan, she remembers what he took from her. And every time Negan looks at Maggie, he knows that no apology can erase what happened. Yet they keep moving forward. Why? Because survival has forced them to. And that is what makes Episode 5 so dangerous. Because when survival becomes more important than revenge, people begin making compromises they never thought they would make. And sometimes, those compromises create monsters. Now let's look at the bigger picture. For years, Manhattan has been presented as one of the most dangerous places in the Walking Dead universe. The island is cut off. Resources are limited. Different factions have created their own systems. Some trade, some steal, some kill, and some try to build civilizations. Season 3 changes that dynamic. Maggie and Negan are no longer simply visitors. They are becoming part of Manhattan's future. That sounds like progress, but it also makes them targets. Because once you build something valuable, someone else eventually wants it. And the biggest weakness of any community is not its walls, it is its people. Think about what Maggie has learned throughout her journey. She has seen good people betray each other. She has watched leaders become tyrants. She has watched survivors justify terrible decisions because they believed those decisions were necessary. And Negan? Negan understands that better than almost anyone. He has been the villain. He has been the leader. He has been the prisoner. And now he is being asked to become something completely different: a protector. That is a difficult transformation, because Negan's greatest weapon has never been Lucille. It has been psychological. He understands fear. He understands weakness. He understands how to make people follow him. But now he has to use those skills without becoming the man he used to be. And that creates one of the most interesting questions heading into episode 5. Can Negan protect a civilization without becoming its dictator? Because there is a huge difference between keeping people safe and controlling them. And Maggie is going to have to decide how much of Negan she is willing to tolerate, especially when the stakes get higher. The settlement is already dealing with the aftermath of the earthquake. Food is becoming a major concern. The city is physically changing, and walkers are gaining access to new areas. That means every decision becomes more dangerous. A single mistake could open the gates. A single betrayal could destroy the community. And one wrong decision about food could turn neighbors into enemies. This is where the title Imperialis becomes even more intriguing, because the word itself evokes an empire. An empire requires resources. It requires territory. And most importantly, it requires control. Could Manhattan be moving toward a new struggle for power? That is the question the season has been preparing us for. And if that happens, Maggie and Negan could find themselves on opposite sides again, not because they hate each other, but because they may disagree about what survival actually means. Maggie wants Anom. Negan wants order. Those things can exist together, but they can also collide. And when they do, someone has to choose. That choice could define the rest of the season. There is another important character in this equation too, Hershel. Maggie's son is no longer the frightened child we saw earlier in the story. He is becoming his own person, and that matters, because Maggie's entire relationship with Negan has been shaped by what happened to Hershel's father. Glenn's death changed Maggie, it changed Negan, and it changed Hershel before he was even old enough to understand it. Now Hershel is old enough to make his own choices. That means Maggie can no longer protect him simply by controlling everything around him. Eventually, she has to trust him. And trusting someone in the Walking Dead universe is terrifying, because trust can save you, or it can get you killed.
Here is where the story becomes really interesting. The obvious danger is easy to identify. Walkers, food shortages, damaged buildings, competing survivors. But The Walking Dead has always understood something important. The scariest threat is often the person standing beside you. And episode 5 arrives at exactly the right moment to exploit that fear. Maggie and Negan have spent years fighting each other. Now they are building something together. That means both characters have to confront a question they have avoided for a very long time. What happens when the enemy becomes necessary? Because Negan is not suddenly a good man, and Maggie has not suddenly forgotten Glenn. Their alliance works because the world around them is forcing it to work. That makes it unstable. Imagine a situation where the community is starving. There is only enough food for some people. Someone has to make the decision. Maggie might choose compassion. Negan might choose efficiency. And suddenly, the argument isn't about food anymore. It is about leadership. That is the kind of conflict that can destroy a community from the inside. And there's another layer. Manhattan itself has become a character. The city is broken, but it is still valuable. There are resources here: shelter, medical supplies, food, infrastructure, and possibly something even more important, a strategic position. Whoever controls Manhattan could eventually control an enormous amount of power. That makes Maggie and Negan's community more important than they realize. They are not simply defending a settlement. They may be sitting on the foundation of the next civilization. And if that is true, someone will eventually come for them. That is why the biggest mystery surrounding Imperialis may not be who is going to attack. It may be who wants what Maggie and Negan have built, and why. The answer could completely change the direction of Season 3. There is also an emotional bomb waiting to explode. Maggie's relationship with Negan has always been built around unfinished business. She has tried to move forward. Negan has tried to change. But neither man nor woman can erase history. And now Maggie is beginning to experience something she has almost forgotten: a future. Her connection with Lewis has opened another possibility. For years, Maggie's identity has been connected to grief, to Glenn, to revenge, to Hershel, to survival. But what if Maggie is finally beginning to imagine a life beyond those things? That possibility is incredibly powerful, because moving forward does not mean forgetting Glenn. It means accepting that life continues, and that is one of the most difficult lessons in The Walking Dead. The dead never truly leave. They shape the people who survive them. Glenn shaped Maggie, Lucille shaped Negan, and the choices both characters made years ago are still influencing Manhattan today. That is why this season feels less like a simple zombie adventure and more like a story about rebuilding after trauma. But rebuilding comes with a price. You have to decide what parts of the old world you keep and what parts you destroy. Maggie and Negan are standing directly in the middle of that decision, and no one knows which version of them will emerge when the pressure becomes unbearable. Because if the community falls apart, Maggie may have to choose between protecting the people and protecting the person she loves, and Negan may have to choose between becoming the man he was or proving that he really has changed. That is the real battle. The walkers are only the noise outside the walls. The war is happening inside the characters. So now we reach the most important question. What does all of this mean? Why make episode 5 the point where these conflicts come together? Because season 3 is approaching its second half. There are 8 episodes in the season. Imperialis is episode 5. That means the story is entering the stretch where decisions begin producing consequences. The early episodes establish the new world. Now the story has to test it. And the biggest test is simple. Can Maggie and Negan actually build something that lasts? The answer is far from certain. The community is struggling. Food is becoming scarce. The earthquake has damaged Manhattan. The dead are finding new paths. And human beings are beginning to realize that the new society around them has value. That is a dangerous combination, because scarcity creates fear. Fear creates desperation. And desperation creates betrayal. That is how civilizations collapse, not always because of one huge attack. Sometimes they collapse because people stop believing that everyone else will do the right thing. And once trust disappears, everybody becomes a potential enemy. That is exactly what makes Maggie and Negan such fascinating leaders. Maggie represents memory. She remembers what happens when powerful people are allowed to do whatever they want. Negan represents consequence. He understands what happens when nobody is willing to make the hard decision. Both are right, both are wrong. And together they may actually have a chance. But only if they can stop fighting the ghosts of the past. For Maggie, that means accepting that she cannot spend the rest of her life defined by Negan's crime. For Negan, it means accepting that saying he has changed is not enough. He has to prove it. Again, and again, and again. Because redemption in The Walking Dead is never a single moment. It is a series of choices. Every day, Negan has to decide which man he wants to be. And every day, Maggie has to decide whether she is willing to believe him. That is why their relationship remains so powerful. They don't trust each other completely. They probably never will. But sometimes survival begins with something smaller than trust. Sometimes it begins with necessity. Then necessity becomes cooperation. Cooperation becomes understanding. And eventually, understanding can become forgiveness. But forgiveness is not guaranteed, especially not for Maggie. And that may be the emotional heart of Imperialis. The question is not whether Maggie forgives Negan. The question is whether Maggie can finally forgive herself for wanting a future. Because for years, grief has been part of her identity. Moving forward can feel like betrayal. But it isn't. Living does not erase the dead. It honors them. And that may be exactly what Maggie is slowly learning. Meanwhile, Negan is facing her own test. He spent years believing that power was the only thing that mattered. Now he has something much harder. Responsibility. Power lets you command people. Responsibility means protecting them. Those are two very different things. And if Negan truly wants to become a different man, he has to choose responsibility when power would be easier. That is the real meaning behind the new Manhattan. It is not simply a place where people hide from walkers. It is a laboratory for rebuilding civilization. A chance to ask, what would humanity look like if we started again? Would we repeat the same mistakes? Would leaders become tyrants? Would survivors divide themselves into tribes? Would fear once again become the foundation of society? Or could people finally learn? That is what makes Imperialis such an important chapter. The future of Manhattan may depend on whether these characters can learn from the past. And if they fail, the city could become another kingdom built on fear. But if they succeed, they could create something the Walking Dead universe rarely gives its characters, a real future. And that brings us back to the opening question. What happens when survivors finally find a home? They have to fight to keep it. Because the moment you stop running, you become someone else's target. And Maggie and Negan may have just reached the most dangerous stage of their entire journey. They finally have something worth losing. So as Imperialis approaches, keep your eyes on 3 things. First, watch the food situation, because scarcity could become the spark that ignites the next conflict. Second, watch Maggie and Negan. Their alliance is stronger than ever, but that does not mean their past is gone. And third, watch Manhattan itself, because the city is changing, and whoever controls what comes next may control the future of this broken world. That is what makes this chapter so exciting. The walkers are still out there. The danger is still everywhere. But the real question is no longer, can they survive? It is, what kind of world will they build if they do? And sometimes, that question is more frightening than the apocalypse itself.